Hi, Idris. Thank you so much for joining us at the DEI Innovation Summit. We are so excited to have you. How is it going? What's happening? Thank you for being here.
No, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to see you and to join the summit and contribute.
So, listen, Idris, I first saw you, like with the rest of the world, on the legendary TV show The Wire, which incidentally, just last week, the BBC named as the greatest TV show of the 21st century.
Wow, I
Yes.
know.
Have you not seen that? Yes.
I did. Yeah, I know. It's
It's
incredible.
unbelievable. And you were playing, arguably, obviously, the greatest character on the greatest show on earth, Stringer Bell.
Controversial.
Well, yeah, a little bit. No, not really controversial. Clearly acknowledged as the greatest character in the greatest show. And that character, Stringer Bell, like he was quintessentially cool, a little bit lethal, but very lethal, but very cool, and quintessentially African American, right? So when someone told me that actually Stringer Bell from Baltimore was actually an East London boy, I was like, nah, that is not possible. In no world is that possible. What I want to understand, Idris, so you were brought up in East London, in Newham, Hackney, Dagenham. I don't even have the vocabulary to explain to people in LA how, or anywhere else in the world. How do you translate Dagenham? How do you get from doing night shifts in a car factory in Dagenham to being an A-list celebrity in Hollywood? How'd you do it, and what were the stereotypes you had to overcome?
Okay, wow. Look, East London is home, right? Everyone comes from somewhere, and that's just really important. It was always important to me. And it became part of the reason why I think, I ended up being, doing what I do, just staying a little bit grounded to where I come from. That actually really propelled me on my journey. Just, not really, straying too far for who I am. I remember when I was probably 19 and I was doing the night shift at Ford. My dad had worked at Ford for a long time. I just remember, the imposter syndrome, if you like. I loved the work. I was there, but I had my mind on some other things, and I really wanted to, I guess, make an impact with my art, with creativity. Like all I thought about was creativity. All I thought about was music, acting, all of that. And I guess part of the reason I stayed on that journey is just because I was always hungry for it. Always determined. Determination was a really big factor. Um, I still an East London boy at heart, to be honest. You know what I mean? Like I think, externally, I'm all over the world, but really my heart and my roots are back in East London. My mum's still there, my family's still there. So yeah.
But didn't you also say that, like, back then, you and your agent, basically you were coming up against casting directors. They always wanted to, like, cast you as the character, the athletic type, or the black male, or like, how didn't you say, like, how were you ever going to get to be seen as a lead as opposed to the stereotype of a supporting role?
Yeah, it was, I mean, it was again part of the determination, right? I could see that there was a sort of glass ceiling to most, young black actors, older black actors. They would just stay in a place. Apart from, when you look to America and there were really big, huge African American stars that were not being boxed. So it was possible. But I just remember, my agent, Roger, who's still my agent, we just decided very early not to go up for the roles. It meant working less. It meant being seen less. But ultimately, when I said I'm not going to just play the thug or the guy that's next to the guy, it really then made my work more selective and more, focused. Essentially, it was a lot of no. And then eventually there was change, right? It takes a few people just to kind of say, no, we're going to do this a different way for it to become so. So look, I think my journey as an actor has definitely been one that has not been without its struggles and its challenges. I've faced it all. But ultimately, again, the word determination sticks with me.
So is it an exaggeration to say, apparently, you got your first acting break from Prince Charles? Like,
It's an exaggeration, a little bit,
It's
because
it was.
That sounds like Prince Charles was in the audition going, yes, I'll give you the job. No. It would be an exaggeration, but without a doubt, the Prince's Trust gave me a grant. I auditioned for a grant. There was only one or two that were being dispersed in East London, and me and one of my best friends at the time both went up for this grant, and we both got it. Like we were the both two kids that got a Prince's Trust grant, and it allowed me to work with the National Youth Music Theatre, which is really great body professional theatre that gave young people a chance to do it. You needed some money to be a part of it, and I didn't have any. My parents didn't have any. My family couldn't. So I applied for this trust. So Prince Charles definitely contributed to me stepping into this world as an actor.
And that's one of the things this initiative, the ACT report, is looking to do. It's looking to get more organizations and tech companies to work with more organizations like the Prince's Trust, especially to give kids from low-income families and backgrounds that chance. Because I think people don't understand, when you've got the bank of mum and dad behind you, people don't understand how hard it is to break in when you don't even have the fare to get to the audition and all of that. Do you think we're getting better about that, about making those connections?
We all recognize that there's stuff to do. There's some connective tissue that's not quite working for everyone, and we need to make that work. So I think we are getting better. I'm an optimist, right? I'm never going to say no, 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 because I don't think that gets us anywhere. But I actually do think there is some change. There's some movement. Even you and I having this discussion is part of that movement, right? The fact that we've got these great big companies that can make change just by their size and their girth in this world means that there is real connection now. We can have the discussion. And like you say, there are real small practical issues as to why there are so many young people in areas that are underrepresented that could just bring more people in. Small practical changes, small things to be aware of, just basic encouragement, it's really important. Like my production company, we always try to, the people watching the TV need to look like the people making the TV. That's how it really should work. So therefore there's a real circular, motion to it.
Yeah, because at the moment, TV world doesn't look like the real world. And in fact, in 2016, you made a speech at the UK Parliament on the subject of diversity. It's an amazing speech because you spoke so much about what shaped you and got you to where you were. And a lot of things struck me about what you said. One of the things you said, and I remember you saying this to me before you gave the speech, and then at the time, you said that I am not just going to talk about Black people. And you said that you actually said, this is not a speech about diversity. This is a speech about imagination. It's not a speech about race. It's about imagination. And what you were calling on content creators to stay away from stereotypes. Do you think there's better understanding? I mean, a lot of the people that are watching this, they either work for platforms or companies that create content, or they are content creators themselves. What do you think helps them, if you have any ideas of staying away from those stereotypes? And again, do you think we're making any progress?
You know, as a storyteller, like, I'll tell you a story. John moves into a neighborhood that he doesn't know anything about. He comes from a very different neighborhood. When he gets to this new neighborhood, his eyes are open to so many different cultures. And then John becomes a lot more cultured himself. Simple story, right? Ultimately, for me, creators need to dive and move into other neighborhoods. They need to take a good look around to who's around, who's consuming these stories, who is looking at the creation. I bet you any money it's more different types of people than it is just one type of person. So therefore, if creators can sit back and sit comfortably in environments that they can learn from, their creations will be a lot better. I think, not better, but just appeal to more people.
I love what you say there, because it always strikes me. You and I have worked on these issues in the broadcasting industry for a while now, and we go around and we say to content creators, think about and portray people outside your own environment. And what really struck me with The Wire, for example, like David Simon, the writer and creator, he was a white man, and it was a white male production team. They created one of the most extraordinary, diverse pieces of content that the TV world has ever seen. And they were able to do that. Why? Because David Simon went and sat on a corner in Baltimore for 4 bloody years, literally 4 years. And that's what I say to any majority group. Hey, if you're going to go and actually be proximate, if you're going to go and actually see what is happening on the ground, you too can do. It's not so you don't have to be limited by your background. What you are limited by is your awareness and your experience. So I think The Wire really illustrates that point you're making, and I hope we're
And that
getting
was,
better.
that was 20 years ago. And if you factor in how long David Simon and the writers had been, in Baltimore, working for the Baltimore Sun, you could say that journey started 30 years ago because he was there for a long time in the neighborhood. And then subsequently, what he did was convince HBO that this particular storyline is going to matter. And it did. Shout out to HBO for taking that shot in the beginning. So shout out to any content creator or, company that can put creation out there that's beginning to move into neighborhoods. Shout out to you guys, because that's the sort of, the beginning of change. I do, like I said, I'm optimistic that it's happening. Things are happening, things are moving. Since 2016, when we did that speech, I've seen monumental shifts. But obviously, we're saying monumental because, it's been very little for so long. These shifts aren't that big, and there's much more room. But they're monumental in the vision of seeing something happen.
So that's the point about if obviously it's even better to not just have an all white male, creative team, but people don't have to be limited by what their background is if they're willing to go out and bring those diverse voices in. And so one other thing you've spoken about, you've spoken about how the media world has changed from the days when we grew up. You are giving away a bit how old we are, but anyway, yeah, it was quite a while ago, wasn't it? And when we grew up, like in Britain, there were like 5 channels basically on TV. 4 channels. I was going to say 4.
3 channels, then channel 4, then channel 5.
Exactly. I was going to say 3, and I was like, no, he's 5 years younger than me. But anyway, right. So, and the thing is, Idris, we both know there basically weren't any black people on those channels. More or less, basically, there were no black people on them, right? But now the media landscape is just changed so much. And I just wondered, like, what do you think is the risk if broadcasters and content creators don't include underrepresented groups in their content?
Well, I mean, the risk, look, it's already happened. You know what I mean? When you compare how significant those 5 channels were to our content, to what we saw on TV, those 5 channels were everything. And then suddenly you've got YouTube, you've got Snap, you've got all these different forums that are essentially channels. People have moved on. They're not seeing what they want to see. They're not seeing themselves. They're not seeing a bit of culture diversity on the 5 channels. Moved on. So that's the risk, right? That's the risk for anyone. I think the 5 channels still have their place in, and I'm talking about symbolically the 5 channels, not the 5 channels in the UK, but people are taking their content from everywhere now. And they're going where they can find representations of themselves or a broader spectrum of representation. That's what's happening. So the risk is you're just not in that conversation anymore. I've got a 7-year-old who might not even know who the BBC are or who NBC are. Ultimately, he knows that he can type in what he wants to see and he gets that. So that's the risk.
And in fact, when you were talking, it reminded me of the olden days approach. I say olden days. You remember I was at Channel 4. I was their Chief Diversity Officer. Loved Channel 4 for like nearly 8 years. But I remember someone there telling me that you came in to see a commissioner at Channel 4. This is before The Wire. And the commissioner said, yeah, this young guy, Idris Elba, he came in. Yeah, thing is, he's a bit niche. We can't use him. That's Channel 4, right? And obviously that commissioner will remain nameless forever and a day and has long left the channel. However, what he didn't mean Idris is niche. What he really meant was Idris is black. Right, that's what he really meant, right? And this thing about commissioners always viewing people from underrepresented groups as risk. Do you think, I mean, obviously, look, you're an A-list celeb, so you've got over the risk factor, but in general, do you think people are getting better at being able to understand that you shouldn't just say, oh, women directors, they're a risk. You know, content about disability, that's a risk. LGBTQ plus communities, that's, you know, everything's a risk. Yeah, are we getting beyond that? And did you think you were niche back in the day?
Did I think I was niche? I mean, as you say, you know, I don't think that commissioner, you know, is talking about me, but I think, you know, essentially, when he looks at his audience spectrum, you know, having a young black actor as the lead would not satisfy the audience spectrum, who in England at the time is predominantly white. So that's definitely, he wants to see his culture on the TV and he thinks this culture is niche. We've moved so far from that, you know what I mean? And I think that, you know, the word risk was really attached to, do we lose audiences if we show a culture that they're not a part of? Yes, that is the risk. Losing audiences these days is not the talk anymore, you know. Yeah, it's about keeping an audience's perspective. It's about encouraging a new audience. So yeah, risk factor has just changed as a component of decision making. Risk is not really a big factor anymore. It shouldn't be a big factor. The risk is not doing it, you know, not being diverse in content, not being able to, you know, show cultures that don't really represent the majority.
Yeah, basically not being able to represent the real world.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a real consumer consciousness now across everything from buying a pair of sneakers to watching something. And the majority are conscious that, hey, that looks a bit undiverse. You know what I mean? And people are going, I'm not interested as much. It's not interesting just to see all, you know, one culture. Mix it up, like the real world that I live in, as you say.
So, talking about the world we live in, I wanted to tell you a little story about that someone told me who I work with here at Snap. And they were basically doing like an audience survey. And they spoke to a woman. She's a big fan of yours. She happens to be black. She happens to be blind. Because accessibility isn't great in media, film, and online, and basically audio description falls short. Here's the thing, she only found out you were black when she was reading some newspaper speculation. We know all that newspaper speculation about you being the first James Bond, all that old chestnut, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, she had no idea. She assumed you were a white man. She pictured you as a white man. As a black woman, she was overjoyed to discover you were black, but she kind of felt she'd missed a lot. Like clearly. So my question is, do you think people give enough thought to the experience of people with disabilities? And have you got any insight at all into that world?
No, I would say no. I don't think people give that much of a thought to disabilities in terms of, you know, creating accessibility to creation. Obviously, yes, there are, you know, tools that are designed for, you know, hearing and disability so that content can be consumed. But I really do think it's not on the forefront of everyone's mind. I think that it's on the forefront of some, but not everyone. So even for me, that's an adjustment that I have to continually make as a producer to make sure that, you know, everything becomes inclusive. I would love to see a future where, you know, disability is at par with everyone in terms of how people consume content. I would love to see that happen. I think we've got a ways to go.
You've spoken a little bit in the past also that when you were a kid, and again, correct me if I'm totally way off on this, that you had really severe asthma. And did you go to a school for kids with disabilities? Tell me a tiny bit about that.
Yeah, so, I had asthma around the age of 9, 10, 11. It was pretty severe. I was hospitalized quite a bit. In the school I went to, normal state school, had a nurse, but when I got into severe asthma attacks, it was panic station. So eventually, they decided to send me to a school called Stormont House, which is still there. It's an incredible school, and it's a school education facility for disabled kids. I found myself there for a year, and at 9, I mean, I had no look. It was quite a moment for me in my life. I remember, growing up, we'd see disabled kids on what they called the special bus, and they'd drive past, and the kids would, kids are mean. It's like you're on the special bus. And then I found myself going to school on the special bus myself. And, I was blinkered. I'm 9, but I was blinkered to disability until I got there. And I remember going to my Mum, I'm not supposed to be here. These kids aren't well. And they're like, no, son, you're not well either. And, this is the way that, we can monitor your health as you're in school. Quick adjustment, that year in Stormont House was probably the most significant year of my young childhood, because my best friend had multiple sclerosis, and I remember he was incredibly engaging and full of beans, you know what I mean? And there were kids with all sorts of disabilities in that school that I had to bond with very quickly, and they bonded with me. And I learned how to, play the bass guitar and play drums in that school, all with kids. We played football, and it was an incredible year, but literally opened up my eyes. And I think that's really part of, as I grew up as a teenager, just having a slightly wider perspective on life a little bit. I think it's propelled me into into being an adult. But yes, that school really changed my life, really opened my eyes. And now I guess, that's why I'm sort of conscious of diversity, and that there are people that are just not being talked to. I remember when we was at Stormont School, if a theatre company came to our school to perform, it was like, wow, they came to see us. You know what I mean? Like, it was it's actually quite emotional for me when I think about it, because it was quite a deep time. I could run for about 5 minutes, before my chest caved in, and it was at that school I got better. It was at that school I sort of learned about how to deal with my, issue, asthma. Yeah, wow, what a question.
Oh my God, Idris, you've blown my mind again. That's just so profound, especially what you said there of, I know what you're talking about, the special bus. Yeah, like kids, you'd see the special bus and you used to look at that, and then you found yourself on the special bus, right? And that does just give you that completely different perspective. And I think, disability is one of those just huge issues that too often gets left out of the diversity, equity, and inclusion debate. I have 4 kids. 2 of them, turns out, have disabilities. One is registered disabled. And, you just don't think about it, really, like you say, until you end up on that bus.
You don't. And again, it goes back to our point about people, creators, moving into a neighborhood to understand. Move into the neighborhood of disability a little bit, understand what is happening, what the restrictions are, what the perspective is, not only how people view disability, but how people that are disabled view the world and what they're seeing. Step into the neighborhood a little bit.
In 2020, a lot of white people suddenly went, oh my God, we must do something about systemic racism. I just want to know, did this kind of fill you with joy or just make you roll your eyes?
It didn't make me roll my eyes, actually. It made me sit up, Look, the idea that there's suddenly this stream of consciousness about racism is a step in the right direction. Yes, you and I both know that as Black people, that's always been the case. Okay, so now you realize we need to do something about it. You know, it didn't make me roll my eyes. It made me go, okay, let's move then. Thank you. Finally, gear change, you know? And ultimately, any incremental change is a good one. You know what I mean? Like rolling your eyes is that's a sign of contempt. I want that change. I want you guys to have that moment and say, oh, wow, we haven't thought about this. Maybe we should. Yes, please. Now we should. Let's move on. Quite frankly, you know, when you're black and, you know, racism is an everyday, get into an elevator, walking down the street, it's an everyday part of your consciousness. You know, the world catching up later on does not move me. It's great that but what are we going to do about it? That's the question. What are we going to do about it now? You know?
I love that question, what are we going to do about it? Because that is essentially what this day is about. This summit is about the what are we going to do about it? Because, you know, you're right. As a black person, like I remember, and you would get, I'm sure every black person gets this, but in Parliament, I would be asked all the time, basically, a question which means essentially, why don't black people have a sense of humor about race? And I just wanted to, yeah, have you had that?
You know what? No, no one's ever asked me that. I'm just too big and ugly for them to look me in the eye and ask me that because that just wouldn't go down well with me. Bottom line, I think people have never asked me that because how dare you? Ultimately, you know, I've had the whole spectrum of racism thrown at me from, you know, from the time I grew up in an area which was essentially a national front area, a national front being a very racist right-wing organization. And that area, every day I got something, you know. So there's nothing funny about racism ultimately. So I'm glad no one asked me that question.
I used to get it in Parliament, honestly, I swear to God.
It's mad.
It was
It's mad.
just like, but, you know, and also about, and for women, it's the same thing. Oh, these women, you know, they just don't have a sense of humor. I'm like, yeah, I'm done with 5,000 years of patriarchy / misogyny everywhere we look. So just trying to change that, it's so exciting that people have come together for this. I just want to thank you so much because, I mean, what was it just the other day? Front cover, coolest man on earth. So coolest man on earth is thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yeah, can you just underline that point for me? And then I might let you go on with your life. Yeah.
Man, listen, you know, that's very nice to be called the coolest man on earth, but there's nothing cooler than all of us sort of really recognizing the cool in each other. You know what I mean? Like that's really kind of sexy to me when one day we're not talking about racism and we can actually appreciate and draw from each other's cultures in a even field. Not just cultures, but your wealth versus someone else's wealth, ability versus disability, that we all look at each other as on an equal plane. That would be cool. That's the conversation I think this is you know surrounding. I think more conversations like this. Oona, I've always admired you as a thinker and a thought provoker, and I'm so glad that you're behind this because I think you know your power you've motivated me in my life, right? So the fact that you're at this junction motivating people to have this conversation is important. Look, before I go, right, when the Euros happened in England and there was this massive sort of like focus on how racism is rife on social media and in the form of tech. It's rife because people remain anonymous within it. You know, I piped up to say that I think people should be held responsible for what they say and do on the net because it is a free thinking space for all of us, but it's not a place for us to stimulate hate. It should be a safe space. This is who I am. My name's John, and boom, I'm in social media. So therefore, what I say is accounted for. I don't know how to move the conversation forward. That you know, there were higher ups at both Twitter and Instagram that said, "Look, we'd love to continue this conversation," but I think it's something maybe in this forum for us to always think about. You know, ultimately, creators, they credit their name at the end of the show. You see who's written it. Therefore, you understand where it's come from. It should be no different in the tech space. Okay, if we're allowed to use this incredible forum to sort of share ideas, let's accredit let's put the credits behind who's saying it. And hopefully that will dissuade people that want to just spew hate on the net, dissuade them from doing it. And if you are going to do it, well, say it with your name, say it with your chest. You're allowed your opinion. But this idea that, you know, crime can just sort of, not crime, but hate crime could just be freely zipped around our social media on our phones every day. It's mind-boggling. We shouldn't be let that happen. We shouldn't.
Completely right. And this is the forum for it. And the ACT report does specifically call on tech companies to bring an ethical framework to the products and the platforms, and to consider the impact on users and society as well. And, you know, you're completely right. I mean, it's interesting to me coming from government, where there are regulations for broadcasters. You can't just say what you want on the BBC. You can't even just say what you want in the street. You will be arrested for inciting hatred. Yet, for some reason, we now think the most powerful tool on earth, the internet, you know, it can just remain the Wild West and undermine our democracy and get away from the good side of it. I mean, the good side of technology, we all know. I mean, that's how we can do this. That's how we can connect and do all the good stuff. But yes, we have to take this hugely seriously. And this was the right time, the right call. Let us get back to you.
No, I agree. It should and could be regulated. And we're talking about simple tools that just make sure that racism, sexism, misogyny, hate crime are just filtered out.
Idris, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Do you know how many people offered to do this interview in case I couldn't make it? A lot. There were a lot. I was like, nah. But Idris, seriously, thank you so much. You've got a huge global following, and we really appreciate you lending your huge platform to such an important cause. So truly, thanks again, and see you next time I'm in East London.
Thank you, Oona. Thanks for having me. I've had a great time talking to you, and consider me a friend of the project.
Mwah. Take care, Idris. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.